Today we're creating jewelry and playing with stunning turquoise. Making the same size of balls every time, it makes life so much easier. Just look at that. And voila, we have a beautiful turquoise ring. Hello guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today we're creating jewelry and playing with stunning turquoise. Stunning turquoise. I have the stone for so long now, but I was just thinking what to create actually, because it is quite expensive and it's very precious too. It's so unique that it has to be something cool out of it. I decided to make it as a ring, make pattern on the band as well, but keep that bezel quite simple. Because if you know me, I like to accentuate the stone first, because stone is the star of the show. So I think handmade pattern band would be very pretty look from the back side and from the side when you're looking to the ring. And we will solder some bolts on the bezel as well, because that stone is pretty high, so I will show you how you can do that as well, how to achieve the same ball each time too, because that's important if you want them the same. And this video is sponsored by GRANDE, a store where you can find anything you might need, from supplies, tools, equipment, whatever you might need, they probably have it. And we have a code for $20 off of your shipping price, so make sure you're using that until we have it. And yeah, I think we have to start this. And we're starting everything with making a bezel setting for this gorgeous turquoise stone. I always work with pliers first, because when you have something to grab on the stone, it's way easier to wrap it around and have that exact shape. I'm working with 0.5 millimeter thickness of a bezel wire. And usually I'm making my wires myself, so it's not that soft to begin with. And always be aware how you're connecting your wire, because sometimes if you're not checking both sides, it could be not even at some point and you won't have that flush connection, which is very important before soldering, because we want the strongest connection that we can get. Now we're making circles with our torch, just to have that heat spread out evenly and pointing that a bit more to the seam that we need to solder. After soldering and pickling the bezel, we have to sand the bottom part, because we need to make sure that it's flat. And not only flat, we want all walls would be the same thickness on the bottom as well. So we're moving in different directions, we're making 8 number, we're making circles, and we're twisting that bezel setting around as well as we go. That's how you will make sure that you're sanding evenly and not losing the height of the bezel at some point. And don't get frustrated if it's not that quick as you thought it will be, because it truly takes some time. I'm not showing you the whole process of it, because we would be here all day with a long process. Everything takes time. With jewelry making, it's always like that. Just be prepared that you will spend more time than you imagine. Even now, I have 6 years of experience. I still think that it has to be quicker than it actually is. Okay, now we're soldering our bezel wire on that bezel plate, just to create that beautiful setting. For that, I'm heating up my piece with the flux first, that it would dry out a bit. And when those bubbles are going down, I'm placing my solder pieces in the bezel setting. This way we have full control where everything is, because we need that our solder would be touching a bezel plate and a bezel wire at the same time, because when we're heating the piece, everything gets hot not at the same time usually. So we want to have some time to spread that heat as evenly as we can, and then we can see how beautifully that solder is connecting all around our bezel wire with a bezel plate. And as you can see, I'm pointing my heat on that bottom part, because the bottom part is the biggest part we have here. We need to make sure it gets hot enough to transfer all that heat to that bezel wire as well. And I'm showing you basically all that time that I need to heat up everything, that you would have a clear idea how much time it actually takes. And we are working with 0.5 millimeter thickness of that bezel sheet as well. So everything is quite thick. For that, we need bigger heat, and for that, we can't play with small torches if it's not with oxygen. And it's very easy to check how that solder went around everything, because you need to see that yellow line around inside and outside of that bezel wire. Now we have to prepare our bezel setting for our ring. It has to be without any lines. At least that's my point of making jewelry. Sometimes we can leave that edge and it would give a different style, but usually I don't leave anything and I make sure that I don't have any lines. Especially this time because I want to solder some balls around my bezel setting. Now I will show you how I'm making the same size of balls every time for my bezel setting, because sometimes we need same size. And if I want to make the same size, I always make some gem rings, because it's the easiest way how you can melt metal in the first place, and you can always be in control with the size of your balls, because you will always know how much of silver you're actually melting. To make the size of balls, I used 1.3 millimeter thickness of wire, and the size of them is 4.5 number on that gem ring maker. It's better to melt your balls on the flattest surface as you can have, but at that point I didn't have one, so I was melting however I could. That's why I had to sand more, just to have that flat bottom. But you want to have a flat bottom just to make sure everything is soldering very well on your bezel setting. At this point, I was trying out my new soldering board. I tried to find the easiest way how to solder my balls on my bezel setting. So if you have better ideas, let me know in the comments. I always wait for those suggestions. But at that point, my head put me on this idea, which worked pretty well. I cut some copper wire and just pushed them in that soldering board, because this one is very coarse and you can actually push some stuff in it, which is very cool because, you know, we have some projects that we need to push something in just to stabilize and make that placement a bit better. Usually on these occasions, I'm using some kind of clay just to make sure everything is fitting together. But with the clay, sometimes you get that dirtiness and that solder is not flowing that well. And when you have to remove it, you have to make everything clean. So, you know, everything comes with pluses and minuses. So we have to make sure that we're choosing the easiest way for ourselves. So for me, it was easier to make it that way than it would be with the clay, because I can see better as well, because sometimes with the clay, you don't have that view that well if you actually want to make sure that your pieces where they have to be. But it's always a preference, and at this project, when we have to solder a lot of balls around our bezel, I think it's pretty good way how we could do that. I will try more ways as always, but you know, it was the first time I was soldering balls on the bezel itself. I never did that before, which is always fun because, you know, it's hard to find new things that you haven't tried yet. And of course, when I have smaller details that I have to solder on my piece, or even bigger ones, I use a sweat solder technique because it always works. And it always makes sure that you're not putting too much of solder as well, that you have to clean after, and you have a beautiful seam. And it takes some time to heat up all that piece because we have a lot of components. We have to make sure that we heat everything up. If we add some third hands, or in this case we have copper wire, we have to heat everything up just to have that solder flowing. Everything you add up to your metal to hold the piece, to make that placement or something, acts like heat sink. It's like a sponge and it takes all the heat. So you have to give more heat. That's how it works. Now when we have that bezel going, we leave it aside and we need to make a ring. For this one, I'm using D-shaped wire and I put pattern on it as well. The same D-shaped wire and how I'm putting pattern, I will link here in the corner. I love this pattern, it always works. I use a lot of it in my pieces. Now we want an open space for our bezel to be soldered on. At the same time, I don't want to have too heavy base because that stone itself is quite heavy, but we want to have structure. So for that, I'm making a shank ring. And to create that, we need flat spaces in the middle of our D-shaped wire, just to be able to connect that together and have that split shank. Just to have a bending, I'm using pliers and keeping that middle part kind of untouched and flat, about 2 centimeters in the middle of that ring. We can make it flat both ways, using flat file itself or using this guide, just to help to make it happen more accurate, because it's not easy to make 90 degrees flat spot, especially when we have to make it in 2 centimeter mark. So it's pretty good to have something to navigate with. I do it both ways. It depends on the day. Sometimes you're more accurate, sometimes you're less. So if you want something simple and working, it's a very good choice. I've linked a lot of my tools in the description box, so make sure you check that out. And now we came to that soldering part, and if you did a good job and had that flat space to solder together, it's very easy to do because we're touching just at that point where we want that solder would flow. So I'm keeping my solder at less because we can always add more, so make sure you are using less solder all the time. Because too much will give you a lot of sanding, and sometimes if we will get solder in the pattern itself, it's not a nice thing to clean that out. And make sure you're turning your piece when you're soldering, just to make sure we have that solder coming through all that seam. We don't want to have gaps or uneven melting. When we pickled our ring part and cleaned the excess solder, if we have some, we have to bend it into a ring shape, and that I'm doing with my ring bending pliers, just to have that shape going, and then I'm correcting everything and making the size that I need on my ring mandrel. For me, it's the easiest way how to do that because I have my leather pillows. These ones I made myself, but it's very practical thing when it comes to jewelry making. I'm using that all the time. Now when we have the size and the shape that we need for our ring, for this one I made size 18, so it was perfect amount of opening for my bezel. The ring part we have to make flat where it's connecting with our bezel setting. And if you want secure and no gapping, I truly recommend sand belt. It makes life way easier and way quicker, because to make flat spot by hand with a file, when we need to file quite a lot and it would be on 90 degrees and beautifully flush with the surface, it's quite hard, really. So I truly recommend the sand belt to do that. And when we have that soldering process, it makes life so much easier. Just look at that. It's just so flush with the surface that even we don't need a lot of solder to solder it. And now all that's left to do, sanding, polishing, and setting the stone. It takes a lot of time, at least it takes for me, because every piece for me it's different. I want different finishes. I want to try out different finishes as well. Usually I make everything mirror shine and then going with other abrasive on it as well. So when you're sanding and polishing, just be creative. Nothing will happen. Make that mirror shine, put different abrasives on it, take it out again. Just play with your pieces, because you will never reach the finish that you want if you won't do that. As you can see, I was going with abrasive wheels, then I went for compound as well, because polishing machines won't reach things that you can reach by hand. Then after that sanding, I'm putting my piece in a tumbler. Not always I'm doing that, but this time I did. I wanted even more shine, but I didn't want to lose that handmade feeling as well, so we still have some lines on the piece. I like to have more lines on my back plate as well. So I truly mix and match my sanding and polishing. Now all that's left to do is just to set the stone in. I'm showing and talking about the setting process in my other videos more, so I will link one of them here. Now we have last finishing touches. And voila, we have a beautiful turquoise ring. Okay, we have a ring. It's polished and clean, and it's so pretty. I think it's one of my favorite rings that I created. I just love how those balls are looking like. They're so cool. It's truly stunning, and I hope you find something useful out of this video. Ask me questions in the comments. Give me suggestions. I always want suggestions. It truly helps me to plan ahead and have videos that you would want to watch and it would be helpful for you. That's very important for me because I want these videos would be useful for you. That's why I'm giving you a lot of different structures when it comes to rings, when it comes to earrings, because if you have a structure, you can do whatever you want. So yeah, I hope you find it useful and I hope you like it. And I will see you in my next one.